All right. Hey, well, welcome to another episode of Coach P's Perspective. Man, I am pumped. Today I have one of my good friends, a man that I find is a true inspiration, and this is Johnson. So, I'll put his bio. His bio is incredible and it's huge, but a few highlights for me. He's the founder of FCA Wrestling. He's on the board for FCA Wrestling. That's how we initially met. When you guys hear him talk, he's the voice of college wrestling. So all my wrestling coaches and fans and people out there, you're going to hear his voice like, I know that guy. Like, watching wrestling on ESPN. He's a member of several wrestling Hall of Fames, National Hall of Fame, the Gable Hall of Fame, which are the most elite of the elite. So, Tim, man, thank you for being on.
Hey, great to be with you, Chad. Thanks for asking me.
Yes, sir. So, all righty. Well, let's just kind of start here, with your backgrounds. Tell us about where you grew up, how you got into sports.
Yeah, I just told the story this morning to about 35 men. It's a Christian men's group that I spoke at this morning here in Champaign, Illinois. I've lived in Champaign for the last 31 years in Champaign, Illinois. But I grew up in a small farm town, 900 people, a town called Morning Sun, Iowa, southeast Iowa. And, it's interesting. My story is actually, we got a brand new riding lawnmower when I was 6, not quite 7. So it's the summer of 1960. And I was just dumb enough. I mean, a kid, I had tennis shoes on and they're still dew on the ground and ran up behind, slipped underneath that lawnmower and it cut my leg off, bone, artery, nerve, everything, just sliced it except for a piece of skin waiting there. And we had a 17-year-old Eagle Scout, David Beck, working on our farm. And he had the presence of mind to scoop me up. My mom, who I'm going to see next week, still can't talk about it. She's sitting there with that mess on her lap. My dad's in the truck, but David had the presence of mind to see my shoe with the string there, and he took the shoestring out, put a tourniquet on it, and basically they said, save my life. I was within a minute of losing my life and my leg, and he tied it on and did it right. I mean, an Eagle Scout. That's why some people say, well, Tim said on the broadcast before that an Eagle Scout saved his life because we'll see. I think it was Orndorff this year, Tate Orndorff. He was an Eagle Scout. So I get excited thinking about that. And so I grew up then, and they saved my leg. The doctor saved my leg, had 8 operations in 8 years at the University Hospitals in Iowa City, Iowa there. And a guy named Coach Dara. I mean, if you know Iowa wrestling, you know Coach Bob Dara. He was the wrestling coach that just started, but he was also my PE teacher. They called it PT back then. And he took this crippled kid who was on crutches half the year, every year for 8 years. And he just basically said to me, way before Spencer Lee said it the other day, that excuses are for wusses. Yeah. And he made me think at 7 years old until I was 15, hey, no excuses. Let's get out and go. And so he then later left Morning Sun and developed the Dowling of Des Moines dynasty in the 80s and the 90s, and then was the head coach of Simpson, Hall of Fame, incredible coach, greatest influence in my life back then, because I'll never forget, Chad. So part of my story in this small town is, well, I also broke this same leg playing football in the playground in junior high, and I was coming back from a doctor's appointment, and they said, Timmy, we know you love wrestling and baseball, but you cannot play football. Your leg's too brittle. Yes, it was a couple inches shorter. It looked like a polio victim. I had dropped foot, and it was crippled foot, but it was still a leg. But I had to tell Coach Dara, who was also the football coach, and if you grew up in small towns, you know what I mean. You just don't not play football. And so to make a long story short, I remember walking up to, I played baseball in the summer in Iowa, and Coach Dara was at a baseball game, standing in third base line right next to the bean field. I walk up to him and I've got to tell him, Coach, I'm not going to be able to play football in high school. Now I'm just a 7th grader, but and I thought he was going to call me. I can't even say on this what I thought he might call me back then. Let's just say I thought he was going to say, you sissy, Johnson, and you get the drift. And I just was wondering how loud he was going to say it. And I was going to just say, I know, I am. And he put his arm out, and I thought he was going to hit me. And he put his hand on my shoulder, and he goes, Timmy, as long as you wrestle, you'll be okay. Chad, it changed my life.
Yeah.
I get emotional thinking about it. He took a crippled kid that was ready to go upside down and turned him right side up. And I committed my life to wrestling right there.
Mm-hmm.
And, he basically saved me there. And it wasn't until a long time later, we can get into that, that I realized that, first of all, that's what I call the life-changing power of well-chosen words. Mm. And then, so I give a talk, do you have a tourniquet in your pocket? And I talk about how everyone's got the opportunity to stop the bleeding. Do you have a tourniquet in your pocket? And ultimately, the only hope we have from an eternal standpoint is the hope of Jesus. And that tourniquet, I didn't realize till later that all well-chosen, life-changing words just echo the greatest message that the world has ever known of John 3:16, that God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that who should ever believe in him should not perish, should not be defeated, but have everlasting life. We'll have victory with the capital V. And so it's interesting that, the wrestling connection goes all the way back to the wrestling coach who looked at this crippled kid and said, as long as you wrestle, you'll be okay. And, talk about diversity. There's a crippled kid that said, I'm going to wrestle. And I wrestled all the way through college. And yet ultimately his words made me understand that our words matter. And it better be important because they're life-changing. And so just a little farm town in Southeast Iowa. And, but I wouldn't be from anywhere else. And then I left, I wrestled Division III at Coe College in Cedar Rapids. And then I got my master's and was a graduate assistant at University of Northern Iowa, UNI. And then I coached several years at a high school, Mount Vernon High School, just north of Iowa City, until I left to join USA Wrestling in Stillwater, Oklahoma in 1982 and became their national events director and then had a few other opportunities after that. And so that gets you a little ways in my life.
Yeah. I mean, you grew up right in the heart of wrestling country. And, me being from Oklahoma, you being from Iowa, and both small towns, I fully understand the culture.
What part of Oklahoma are you from?
I'm from Pawhuska, so just north of Tulsa.
Okay, so when I was 16 and 17, I traveled down to Camp Wentz to be at Myron Roderick's wrestling camp at Ponca City. And then when I joined USA Wrestling, I moved to Stillwater, Oklahoma, and my office was in the National Wrestling Hall of Fame before they moved to Colorado Springs. And so I love Oklahoma, and it's kind of cool that actually FCA, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, had its start because of a assistant basketball coach at Oklahoma A&M which is Oklahoma State, back in 1950. 55, 56 in that area. And that's where FCA started. And so it's kind of interesting that, I moved to Stillwater. It's where I surrendered my life to Christ at University Heights Baptist Church in Stillwater. And now I live on Stillwater Drive in Champaign, Illinois.
Yeah, that is awesome. So my hometown is 45 minutes from Ponca. I actually lived in Ponca for a year. My dad coached over there, and
wow.
And then my dad's in the National Hall of Fame in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma branch for coaching wrestling. And so wow. A lot of connections there. But all right, so whenever you went from working down there and then you went to work for USA Wrestling, how did it transpire? Because actually, I don't want to skip over this. Tell me about the Olympics. I know you got to have a hand in working with the Olympics. Tell me that story.
Well, so I coached at Mount Vernon, had a lot of good wrestlers. I mean, I was so fortunate to be there. Life's about relationships.
Yes, sir.
If I know nothing else, I know that. And so Coach Chuck Patton, University of Northern Iowa head coach at the time, UNI's head coach, and Don Briggs became two of my best friends, greatly influential in my life. And Chuck basically played golf in college with the principal and athletic director at Mount Vernon High School. And this young guy who had no experience ends up at Mount Vernon High School with a great wrestling tradition. And I had some great wrestlers. Randy Majors was my first state champion, Paul Hufford, and then Greg Randall, who was at Boise State for years. He was a 4-time state champion for me, and his brother Steve, and just some incredible wrestlers there. And then I just had I had an interest in leadership. And Chuck Patton and Steve Combs were very good friends. Steve Combs was the executive director for the USWF, which became USA Wrestling, and approached me after 4 years at Mount Vernon about coming down and being the first full-time staff person for the national governing body of wrestling. And I wasn't ready. Greg was a junior. He'd won 3. I wasn't going to leave before, he had the opportunity to become only the 5th four-time state champion in the history of Iowa wrestling. And the next year after he won it, I get approached again. Chuck said, "Hey, Steve wants to talk to you." And I thought, you know what? I'm single. Why not? And so I resigned to go join the United States Wrestling Federation in the summer of '82. And a month after I got there, we became USA Wrestling and the national governing body and in charge of the Olympics, etc. And I was the national events director. And so I was traveling around the United States running the Central Juniors and the Southeast Juniors and the Northeast Juniors and this US Open and that. And what's interesting, Chad, is that this is a great story about the Olympics. A guy named Peter Ueberroth, who then became the Major League Baseball commissioner, and he was a successful travel agent type person with a company, an organization that he was very much involved in called YPO, the Young Presidents Organization, and they're owners and CEOs of very, very high capacity companies, and it's a worldwide company. He got a group of YPO people in Southern California together, and they asked for the Olympics. Well, nobody else in 1978 asked for it because it was such a debacle in Montreal. Montreal took decades to dig out of the financial hole that they put themselves in to put on the Olympics in 1976. So, you always bid 6 years out, and they were the only ones to bid for the Olympics. And he had this idea that it could be financially successful. And Peter Ueberroth decided that he was going to run the Olympics with all Southern California people, and we're going to use existing facilities, and we're going to introduce corporate sponsorships, and we are going to make money. And everybody laughed at him. And at the end of the day, they did. They were able to put, 500 million into. He made 500 million. 250 million ended up with the various national governing bodies, and 250 stayed in Southern California for youth sports development. Fabulously successful. What he did, and this is how I got there, what he did was he went to his YPO friends, and he went to a guy named Gary Thompson, who had made his wealth in lumber, and he lived in Newport Beach. He said, "Gary, you wrestled in high school, didn't you?" He goes, "Yeah, in Colorado somewhere." And he goes, "I want you to spend the next 2.5 years of your life traveling the world at your own expense, going to the world championships, etc. And I want you to run the wrestling Olympics like you run your company." And he recruited 33 of his YPO friends, and every Olympic sport was run by very successful business person as part of the YPO. And their idea was to run it with Southern California people. And about 7 months out of the Olympics, Gary, who had gotten to know me and Steve because he was connected with us now for a couple of years, said, "We're not making the progress that we want to make at the Olympics. We're just not getting it done. I want Tim to come out here." And so in the winter of '84, I up and left and lived out in Redondo Beach, wasn't bad, and went every day, and then put together, we had 400 spots to fill, volunteers and people, and I was the manager, the director of the Olympics for 1984, and we put together a great Olympics at the Anaheim Convention Center, right across from Disneyland. Already a convention center, made it into the Olympic venue, and it went off really well. And it was a great experience. I'm a 30-year-old that had no idea what I was doing, but I just got up every day and got after it, and started tapping all the wrestling people I'd known for a couple of years. And we came out and we put on a great Olympics, and so it was quite an experience. Two things on that. one, in my position, you know, it's great that the Olympics went off. In fact, I just got a postcard from Steve Frazier, who had his famous headlock and you know, won the Olympics that year in Greco-Roman. And he and Jeff Blatnick, first of Grecos ever to do that. But my biggest important job was whether or not Milan Ercigan, the head of FILA, now the UWW, okay, all the higher up mucky mucks come into town and they just want to be entertained every night. I mean, and so what we called protocol, we had to make sure that the experience for all the highest international people, we were, you know, doing some really, really neat things. And what really counted was what they said after the Olympics on whether or not the United States put on a good show. And unfortunately, it didn't matter about how well the wrestling went. What mattered was how impressed they were with the whole operation. And then the other thing I would say is I went back to Iowa City we were going to have the Olympic trials there. I wanted to check on something. I went back home to Stillwater. Leroy Smith, who's now the executive director of the Hall of Fame, was my roommate. And he comes back and he says, "You're going up to Iowa City." No, yeah, he called me. "You're going to Iowa City." I met a girl there. I go, "Okay." And she goes, "Yeah, her name's Lisa. I took her to a movie." I said, "That's great, Leroy." He says, "Well, you're going back there. Why don't you take her out?" And I said, "Well, you're the one that found her." And he said, "Well, check her out for me." And on April 7th, 1984, I had been looking for a date in all the wrong places on a Friday night. And finally on a Saturday morning, I called up Lisa, Leroy's friend. I said, "Hey, Leroy may have told you want to go out tonight." Jim Miller was with me. He was my best friend at the time. And Dick Briggs and some others. And we all went out, dinner, dancing. And I have a blind date with this girl that I open up the door and I go, "Oh, this won't be an unpleasant evening." And so we go out, and the next day I told Dick, I said, "I'm going to marry that girl." And on the Queen Mary, 3 months after we met on a blind date, 2 weeks before the Olympics, on the Queen Mary in Long Beach, we were married. And Jim Miller was my best man, and I was his best man 2 months later. So during this Olympic experience, I mean, I'm getting to know my wife. Let me put it this way. We've been married almost 37 years. I think we're going to make it, Chad. I think we're going to make it. But it was not easy, you know. And so 84 was an incredible year. And then I went back, was the assistant executive director for USA Wrestling, continued to, you know, be involved that way. But kind of after the Olympics, you go, what's next, you know? And I went to, I really was interested in leadership, and because somebody, I'd swam in the YMCA, but I became the executive director of the Wichita YMCAs in Wichita, Kansas, from 1986 to 1990, and I cut my teeth on you know, staff development, board development, and fund development. I think God kind of had a plan for where I'm at now, you know, and we'll talk about that. But so I was in Wichita, and then I came to Champaign in 1990 to be the director of a national coaching education program called the American Coaching Sport Program for you know, train up coaches who aren't in the school system to be able to coach. And it was with a company called Human Kinetics, which is the largest publishing company for sport and physical education in the world. And it's here in Champaign. And then God just kept working on my heart. And I'd never thought about being in full-time Christian ministry one day in my life, but I've been growing in Christ. And so in 1993, I became Illinois' first state director for FCA. And now I oversee the Midwest, 5 states, oversee Kansas, where you are, you know, and it's been an incredible 28 years of growing this great ministry of FCA.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I can only imagine, like, once you've ran the Olympics and put on the Olympics, not that every project doesn't have its own difficulties and unique things that have to happen, But even if there's something that's stressful in a new project, you could probably always look back and be like, I ran the Olympics. I think I can handle this.
It's such an interesting thing you talk about. And Chad, I first met you because of your book and the way you think. I really enjoy the way you think, the way you process, the way you risk. And anyway, it's interesting because yes, I do, but there are greater challenges. And so I'm experiencing a challenge right now, with volunteers right now, actually in the FCA ministry in a particular place. And I went, I'm thinking, wow, it never stops. A challenge that takes everything I got plus, and what I mean by plus is, Jesus, I need you.
Yeah.
And I don't think God ever, so unless we step in, I've been reading a book called 1776, and it's about George Washington. And George Washington, they said, rode to the sound of the battle. So, he rode, his people knew that he rode his horse not away, but toward the sound of the battle. Okay. And yet, anytime I would ever do anything like that, it's because I've come through something that we are faithful in. Because if I don't, maybe nothing bad's going to happen, but God's not going to give us the next level of challenge. And so you said that, and so, yes, that was a pretty big challenge for a 30-year-old that didn't know nothing. But I've had much bigger challenges, but without, it's step by step by step.
Yeah.
And so, I can look back at Olympics, but I look back at something that I just did 2 years ago and go, wow, I wouldn't be able to respond to this challenge right now if I hadn't met this one. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times I think we just have to be faithful in, is a challenge in front of us, then you just got to meet it, because it's not just about that challenge. It's about, hey, you're not going to get that next level opportunity, which they are, unless you meet this one. Yeah. And so kind of neat.
I love that thought process. Constant growth. And it's kind of like, let's say, we can use wrestling. It doesn't matter how great a shape you're in. Every workout is going to be challenging when you push yourself, right? And then you're always going to run into obstacles. Like it's one of the things I love about sports and love about wrestling. Like you never reach the level of mastery. Now you can recall and you can call on old things that'll add confidence to what you do. And like, hey, you know what? I've been through that. I can go through this. But no matter what, it's still like you said, meeting the new challenge head on, just putting one foot in front of the other, trusting God in the process, and everything has its own unique challenges. But I tell you what, though, that's pretty cool, though, man. It's a 30-year-old running the 84.
Sometimes awesome. I won the first wrestling tournament I was ever in high school. I got to remind me of something about Jordan Burroughs, and I'll come back to it. Okay. But I don't want to forget it. But I've got my keep on shirt on, and that's my two favorite words right now. You got to keep on. You got to finish strong. Yeah. But you can never discount the importance of a fast start. And my freshman year, the guy was supposed to be the 95 pounder then. Next year, they changed the weights to 98. Now they don't even have that. But he just didn't make weight. He probably would have beat me. But as a freshman, I make the varsity then as a 95. And I go to the Muscatine Invitational. A lot of big schools there. Little Morning Sun, a lot of big schools. Kind of equates to me being 30 and not knowing what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. My record in junior high was 0-1. We didn't have youth sports. I had one match with the neighboring town, and I got beat. I met him as a junior, and I pinned him in 20 seconds, that guy that beat me in junior high. But anyway, I go to this tournament, and I win this tournament. Not really knowing what I'm doing. But guess what, Chad? I never got seeded below first or second the rest of my career. Why? Because of the start that I was. So what do we get when we're first or second seed? We get the 7th or 8th seed. You get the one that's not as good. So you're set up, and that's why I talk to people when they go to college. Get that first semester. You'll never regret. I dug my hole a little bit in the first semester, but if you can get that first semester of grades and workouts and everything, you got a base. it's going to take care of itself. Now it's not the only thing. You got to now work on getting better, but boy, you can dig yourself a hole. And and so the other thing about what you're talking about here is why I guess I just say Jordan Burroughs is my favorite athlete.
Mhm.
Why? I saw him. I was in Lincoln with my state director that I oversee last August, and we went over to where Jordan was working out. I said, Jordan, I think about you every day. And Jordan and I are friends, but I mean, hadn't talked to him for a while. And he goes, yeah. I go, yeah. Because I think about you because Jordan Burroughs, at least for the last 5 years, has to be better than he's ever been. Has to be better than he's ever been just to make the team. I mean, he could not stay where he was, or he wouldn't even, he wouldn't have been around for the last 5 years. He's what, 33, 34 years old, whatever he is. And for the last 5, 6 years, that guy has had to think about, well, that's great, but I have to be better than I've ever been. Now, we've got that coming up next week. And so, I mean, Kyle Dake's so great. And so Jordan, and there's no way Jordan should be able to win, but I'd never bet against him.
Yeah.
Because I know this, I believe that he's got himself in a position to he's better than he's ever been. And that gets harder and harder. And, I just admire him so much, or anybody that thinks that way. But that's a big deal to have to be. You're an Olympic champion. You're a several-time world champion. I got to be better than I've ever been to make the team. And I think about him almost every day because I'm 67 years old. And I was sitting around 20 years ago, I remember, lamenting not getting done what I wanted to get done, winning a state title or winning a national title, and to be thinking, man, I really blew that. And I've never heard the Lord audibly, but I got this sense that the Lord was prompting me. He goes, you talking about that 3/4 inch mat? Yeah, it's not about the 3/4 inch rubber mat. He said, see that door? Every day you open that door, there's your mat. There's championships to win. And I'm going, whoa, I want to be better than I've ever been because there's championships to win. Not in the same way 40 some years ago, but that fired me up because I want to win championships. So I didn't leave the opportunity to win championships behind. Mm-hmm. He's preparing. But the things I didn't do back then that really make a champion, I know one way or another, literally or figuratively, I got to pay attention and do. Because it's not that the championships come because you get older, but I want to be better than I've ever been because I want to win championships as much as the next guy.
Yeah. Well, I love that what you said about Jordan, and that's one of the things that I really love about our sport as well. There's no entitlement in wrestling. There's no resting on your laurels in wrestling.
None.
Like, you got to step out there and prove it every single time. When you put your foot on that line, like, it's time to prove it every time.
And for Jordan, it's being the best in the world, not being the best at your school, not being the best in your state, not being, it's holy cow.
Yeah. And there's not going to be a guy who doesn't bring his best against Jordan. Oh, right. Yeah. Every time, every single time. So, and then I also love that you talked about that winning championships now, because I know when I very first graduated college, when I stopped competing, right? I've been competing since I was like 4 years old. When I stopped competing, I was like, what do I do now? I didn't even think it would be that way. I really didn't. I thought, like, you know what, I'm going to be good to go. And all of a sudden I'm like 6 months out, like laying in bed in the cold sweat. Like, I don't get to compete now. What am I going to do? I think a lot of athletes, when they finish wrestling in college or playing football or baseball, whatever it is, and they've been doing it for so long and you've been so dedicated to it, you're kind of like, okay, I get to go into my career or whatever, but how do I have that same drive and passion? And like you said, there it is. And especially when you're living for Jesus, but I was living for Jesus at the time, but I was still like, there's like, what do I do? But there's so many ways you can take those passions and giftings and then take them out in the world and win championships, like you said, outside of that wrestling mat, because when you step out the doors, man, there's a lot of things to do. So I'm glad
you brought up living for Jesus, and because there's the key, because we all say, what's my purpose in life? And God makes it very clear that The Westminster Catechism, the first question says, what is man's chief end? The answer is, man's chief end is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. Well, what's that mean? What's to glorify mean? Well, it means to, honor, to exalt, to praise, to admire, to promote as famous. I used to promote myself all the time as famous, but to promote God as famous is, so do I glorify? Before I surrendered my life to Christ in Stillwater, Oklahoma, I wasn't thinking about him. I wasn't honoring him. I wasn't living according to his truths. That's the opposite of glorifying. But am I supposed to do something big for him? 1 Corinthians 10:31. That's Paul talking to the Corinthians. He goes, whether you eat or you drink or whatever you do it all to the glory of God. Oh, well, I don't have to go figure out how to become famous so that I can glorify God. From God's standpoint, hey, whatever you're doing, glorify him. Win championships for him. In other words, we have this thing in us to be famous. And that's not misplaced. We are to be about seeking fame for the one that we were created to have fellowship with.
Yeah.
God is most glorified when we're most satisfied in him. In other words, if our main purpose is to glorify God and enjoy him forever, you go, well, that's two. No, he made it so those two can't be separated. When we glorify God, our greatest joy will come, and it's not fleeting, it's forever. And when we have great joy, God is most glorified. So they are together there. And so anyway, that then helps us. What's it mean to live for Jesus? It means to glorify him, whether you eat, you drink, or whatever you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Love it. And that's something that I try to keep in mind. I don't always do a good job of it, but for the most part, try to. And, whenever I see that, and we're not getting into FCA wrestling yet, but whenever you have ministries like FCA wrestling, it's so powerful and important, connecting us coaches to those thought processes and living.
Well, and that's the whole thing there, Chad, that you said, I'm not always good at it, neither am I, but why we weren't made to be lone rangers.
Yes, sir.
That's why we need fellowship. We need, we need team. We need, and so in other words, that's why to be better and better at it, we need to go through life together.
Yeah. All right. This is going to be a little side note inserted in here. I think I just put it on my bucket list to spend a weekend with Tim Johnson and Jim Miller together. Like you talked about, you and Jim being best friends. And so for those who are listening that don't know Coach Miller, you can go back and look at my other episodes. And I got the honor of interviewing him. And Coach Miller is just incredible. Won 10 NCAA Division III national titles and has a new book out, Do It Anyway, which is
Do It Anyway, baby,
right here on my desk. And so you are two of the most energetic, just fired up human beings I think I've ever met in my life. And like just talking to you just fires me up. So I think at some point, man, I'm gonna find you guys at the NCAAs or something just so I can go to dinner with you guys, because I have a feeling my stomach will probably cramp up from laughing just listening to your conversations.
Well, if you knew our stories, so first of all, our whole mantra, our whole thing was, so he was at Charles City High School and I was in Mount Vernon, and then he and I and Coach Dara, the three of us, ran we coached the junior freestyle team for Iowa for several years, the three of us. Okay. So when they were in Iowa City, and then you and I ran with USA Wrestling, but when we were coaching, they were at the University of Iowa, the Fargo of the day. And, but what Jim and I knew, Millboy and I knew, is we didn't know nothing. And so we just look at each other and we go, we don't know nothing. And that was what we knew. And that's why I say to most people, you don't know nothing until you're 40. And then what do you know when you're 40? That you didn't know nothing. Now you're starting to gain wisdom. The Bible says, Proverbs says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And there's something there. The beginning of wisdom is when you realize you don't know as much as you thought you did. Miller and I we knew nothing anyway. And so we would make you laugh because we make ourselves laugh and we make ourselves cringe too. Jim's a believer and I'm a believer. And when we were running hard together, we weren't living for the Lord. And we were exhausting ourselves at things that didn't matter. And we look back and we're glad that the Lord got a hold of us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, let's kind of use that to segue into FCA Wrestling. So tell me, so Fellowship Christian Athletes, the larger organization, and then FCA Wrestling, a sport-specific organization, connected or within FCA Wrestling. So tell me the whole thought process and how this got started and then what we're doing now.
Just first of all, being able to broadcast. I just finished my 35th year, started in Iowa Public Television. Again, it was the person of Chuck Patton that got me into it. Former coach, you and I. Most of everything I do comes back to a couple people. And in 1995, the NCAAs were held in Iowa. Bob Bowlesby is one of my best friends. He's now the commissioner of the Big 12. Tremendous leader. And he was an athletic director at Iowa at the time. And I said to him, Bob, if the Final Four in the Super Bowl can have FCA breakfast, why can't the NCAA wrestling? He goes, yeah, why not? So we started a FCA wrestling breakfast. And probably one of the reasons, it's interesting. I was the only one doing TV back then. So people were subscribing to get our VHS tapes from Iowa Public Television to be able to watch the Iowa State meet or Oklahoma State Iowa meet or whatever. It's funny. There was no internet, and the whole bit, but I had credibility. God had given me favor and stature because I was the guy that was doing TV for wrestling. So because of that, friends with the NWCA, I'd been with USA Wrestling. And so we started, and holy cow, it wasn't long before we went from 100 to 200 to 400 people coming to the FCA breakfast. We started in Iowa City in 95. And that just kind of was the catalyst. And so then FCA started knowing the value of sports-specific ministry. And it was kind of the wild, wild west 12 years ago or so. And we could do what we wanted. And I said, I'm going to start FCA Wrestling. And I said what I said before because I could pick up the phone and call Nate Carr and this person, Brandon Slay, and this person, and say, can we all come to Kansas City for a summit? And let's talk about the potential of this ministry. And 9 of us in 2008, I think, or 9, came together and spent 2 days in the training room at the support center, the headquarters right across from Royal Stadium in Kansas City. And FCA Wrestling was born. We didn't know whether it would be like Sun-Kissed Kids, New York Athletic Club, maybe find a bunch of athletes and put FCA on their deal and maybe help that. We didn't know what it was going to be. And what's so interesting is what it's become. What's today? 28th of this month, which is when? 2 days from now, will be Carl Perry's 10th anniversary as the director of FCA Wrestling. Carl Perry, it's interesting, when he came on his visit, Mark Johnson is been my best friend for 40 years, and Mark and I still have coffee every week and talk almost every day. And he was the head coach at the University of Illinois. And when Carl Perry came visiting from Virginia Beach, he said, can you meet with him? He's interested in spiritual things. And so on his recruiting trip, I met with him, and then we had quite a relationship for his 4 years at Illinois. And then he became an assistant coach, etc. And so we were looking for a director to now take it to a worldwide presence. And we wanted to align with FCA's vision and mission to reach every coach and athlete in this particular sports And so that we could not only introduce to Christ, but help them understand that we're all called to be disciple makers. We're all called to honor God in everything we do and help others know what it means to trust Jesus, honor God in everything we do, and help others know. That's discipleship right there. When you are honoring God in everything you do and helping others do the same. Okay, that's it. And we said, that's what we want to do. And our focus is the coach, because, 50 years ago, this is the compelling case for FCA and the compelling case for FCA Wrestling. 50 years ago, God was basically disinvited on our campuses and our schools, okay? And that's not good for our culture, especially our youth. FCA Wrestling recognizes that the greatest influencer of our wrestlers, of our young wrestlers, outside of the parent in the home, is their coach. And so what we do is come alongside and engage the wrestling coaches in a variety of ways. We have 15 staff now around the United States for FCA Wrestling alone. We're engaging, equipping them in what it means to be a coach for Christ and empowering them to go out. They recognize their why. Why am I here? I'm here to disciple my athletes. I mean, you say, well, how can you do that at a public school? Well, I mean, hey, you can shine for Jesus. What they need, they don't need another club, they just need a coach that it loves them with the love of Jesus, and wants to help them be the best they can be and know why they were created. And so we call that to and through the coach. That's our strategy. And then our method is to engage, equip, and empower coaches to be the coaches that we've called them to be. So that is being done around the nation. Timmy Lambert wrestled for Nebraska. Now he's back at his Michigan. He's involved. He's the person in charge of Michigan to have a strategy to engage, equip, and empower every wrestling coach in Michigan to understand what it means to be a coach for Christ. We also have a really close relationship with USA Wrestling, Rich Bender, and then Bill Zadig and Joe Russell and Matt Lindland and Kevin Jackson and those guys. They want our influence. And so Jose Campo out in California is on staff, but he's incredible shepherd's heart. Jim Grunwald, the head coach at Wheaton, same thing. Two different kind of Jim might kill you with his hammer locks and things like that. But Jim, before COVID, there wasn't a world training camp that we don't have a presence at just to be there for him. I mean, if it's picking up the towels and mopping the mats, what for Coach Zadig, whatever, Jose Campos there, if it's taking some guys to a movie, whatever. But for the ones that want, hey, we'll be in your room and we'll have a Bible study on what it means to compete for Christ. And so now all of a sudden we're going, okay, we need to keep building the bench of potential character coaches who are a part of everything from the senior level all the way down to the cadet level and be with them in their training camps and be there for them. So we have a huge impact in FCA Wrestling, and it's really exciting. And Carl reports to me. I still oversee all of FCA Wrestling, but I don't do any. Carl's leadership, Mark Ellis now in the Midwest. I've talked about Timmy Lambert, Bobby Schreiner in North Carolina, Bill Gifford in Georgia. I mean, Jose Campbell, it just goes on and on. And so it's really cool what God's doing there. And it's very exciting to see the growth of FCA Wrestling.
Yeah, it is, and I know for me, it didn't even cross my mind for years. I mean, I've been to the breakfast. I've been to the Division I FCA breakfast, I've received the New Testaments, from the FCA Wrestling and stuff things, but I was still sort of a lone wolf, like you were saying, still kind of doing things on my own. And I think a lot of times you get head coaches, no matter what the sport is, you get CEOs of companies, you get people that have been put into leadership roles, and they kind of become lone wolves sometimes, and they're doing things on their own and they're pouring into everybody else, but they're not allowing anybody to pour into them. And you can drain yourself pretty quick doing that, And so for me, when I really started to get connected into FCA Wrestling a few years back, and then realize the power in it. And, like you said, I mean, going to and through the coach to really impact so many of the athletes is powerful. And then, for me as a coaching perspective, having people pour into me, make sure that I'm walking a right path, people that I can just open up and talk to, they can give me advice. Those things are huge. You guys got Heath on now. Heath Esslinger is a good friend of mine and has really poured into my life the last few years. Jose, Tim Hess is just an absolute amazing man. And he's been sort of mentoring me from afar for the last couple of years. So the reach that you guys have is absolutely incredible. And so for any coaches out there that are listening, your wrestling coaches, like get on, just Google it, whatever, and I'll put the link in the show notes.
FCA Wrestling, yep.
Get on the FCA Wrestling website, connect with an FCA Wrestling.
The resources on the mat videos of, and you'll see, Tom Ryan, Tom Brands, talking about, hey, I'm a follower of Jesus, Bill Zadig, Jordan Burroughs, all those 2 to 3 minute videos. The devotions that we have to hand to coaches, 365 3-minute devotions written by coaches to coaches and athletes that you can use. We'll put the resources in your hands, Yeah. And then the way we grow, Chad, is, God works on people, and people like Chad Parks finally says, maybe I'm supposed to be Kansas FCA Wrestling staff person.
Yeah. Yep. So, I know a seed kind of got planted a couple of years ago and been mulling around my brain and my heart too. So, and I'm passionate about it. And you said Mark Ellis, me and Mark, I'm going to have him on one of the podcasts soon, connect up, but you guys are doing amazing things. And I love FCA in general, and it actually, before I didn't give my life to Christ, so I was a freshman in college. But when I was a junior in high school, I started going to FCA because the football coach that young football coach we brought in, he started running FCA, and I'm like, this guy's pretty cool. I think I'm going to go there. And, that's kind of started.
Probably some good looking girls were there too.
Absolutely. Yep. For a young man, that's a great motivator.
You mentioned Heath, in all my years of broadcasting, the nice thing about it is I don't have a favorite team. To be real transparent, when Mark Johnson was the head coach of University of Illinois and was my best coach, that's, life's about relationship. But when I was growing up, I'm a Yankee fan, but who was really good. And they say, well, you grew up around Iowa City. Well, believe it or not, everybody that's younger than 45, Iowa didn't have anything going on. They weren't even on the radar before 1974 or 5. So when I'm growing up in the 60s, Iowa State, Gable wrestled there. I was interested in them. I remember when they won their first national title. But I come into this broadcasting, contrary to what some people may think, going, hey, I don't have any I just like wrestling, But that's all to be said. I do have a favorite team, and it has to do with Heath, of course. When he stepped down, my son-in-law, Kyle Rochelle, and my daughter are and so Chattanooga's my team, man. I'll tell you what. And so when I was calling the ESPN, Chattanooga, they got to Friday, won a couple of matches. So when I'm calling the match that's on TV, I'm watching Drew Nicholson over there, or Fabian Gutierrez, and interesting. And I just a little plug. My daughter's my daughter, because she's her father's daughter, because there is no other couple like Kyle and Allie in Division I wrestling today. Kyle, he's the head coach. She's the director of ops, not paid, but and social media person, the person that, and so it's fun to have that to follow. Kyle and I'll be on the phone talking wrestling. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy. And when I walked her down, he was, of course, a 2-time All-American in Wisconsin, and then was a longtime assistant to Barry Davis. And I've known Barry since he was 15 years old. My first state champion, Randy Majors, was the last guy to ever beat Barry. He pinned him in an invitational tournament. Barry was a sophomore. Randy was a senior. We were in 2 different classes, and they both won state championships that year. So Barry and I've known each other, been great friends. And but Kyle and Allie, now getting to follow them and next generation, it's pretty special.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a UTC fan as well. Me.
Oh yeah, because of Heath.
Yeah. Well, because of Heath, and I got a lot of UTC gear, and I still rock it with pride all the time.
There you go.
Yeah. So actually, this is funny because just a little thing, but my favorite pair of socks Heath gave me, and there were some UTC socks. Those are my coaching socks. I wear those when I coach. I'm not into
I got to
lucky
tell Kyle to
things.
get some more. If that's the effect, he needs to get some UTC socks.
Yep. I'm telling you, I don't know why, but a couple years ago, I put those on one weekend, and I was just like, these are my coaching socks. I'm wearing these when I coach.
Go.
So, all right. Hey, I wanted to ask you this because you know, right now you've been able to broadcast so many Division I wrestling tournaments. And of course, I mean, you got Iowa Public Television and all those things, but give me like just one or two of your favorite memories from either the tournament or maybe something that happened whenever you're broadcasting. Because I'm sure you've had just so many incredible ones.
When people ask me, where's my favorite place to do it? I would tell you that it's any place that 1 versus 2 or a top 5 matchup that's a sold out arena.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter. Years ago, it only happened to Carver, but it doesn't. Bryce Jordan, Ohio State. I think Tom Ryan does a tremendous job there, their new facility. But nothing compares to November, whatever it was, 12th in 2015, to be on the field of Kinnick Stadium, to have over 45,000 fans come through and be out there, Iowa versus Oklahoma State, to be in a football stadium that's packed. I mean, 45,000, they said it was 42,800. It was closer to 50. It was unbelievable. The weather in Iowa, November 12th, could be real cold. It got to 60 degrees. It was an incredible. And then my friend Matt Millen, who was there to call the football game that night, Minnesota, Iowa. So 45 go out and another 70 come in. It's the year Iowa was undefeated in football. So it was an exciting time around there. Matt Millen, who is an all-pro and big-time football player from Penn State, is a huge wrestling fan. We had him come down and Jim and I call a match with us. But gosh, I've got a big picture up on my wall next to my 1961 Yankees, and it's that picture of Kinnick Stadium filled, 45,000 fans for a wrestling match. Gosh, that's just unbelievable. Yes. And I hope Oklahoma State now somehow they go down to that stadium there, the Cowboys stadium, and invite Iowa down. Probably is the right matchup. I hope they do that down there in Stillwater as a reciprocal. I was so proud of John Smith to say yes when Tom called him up and said, "What do you think about this?" Yeah. And it was the right two teams. So yeah, so. And when you say what's my favorite, an environment that I don't think I will never be a part of anything like that. You've been to NCAA championships. I mean, I'm just a kid from Morning Sun, Iowa. And like you said, yes, I've run the Olympics and everything, but this year we didn't get to. But those times you've seen me down on the floor before the NCAA finals, made the play-by-play, and maybe Anthony Robles, and we're standing there because it's a lot of hurry up and wait. And when they say ESPN's coming on and the whole crowd knows, okay, let's go. Yeah. I got goosebumps now. I mean, you just going, oh, Lord, I'm just a farm kid. How do I get to be standing down here and doing this with this kind of excitement? And so you can see I'm more about an environment. I mean, I'm 67 and my memory's not as good as it used to be. And Chad, my memory's not as good as it used to be. That was a joke. Yeah. And so my point is, do I remember a lot of matches? No. I remember saying, when Jason Ness and Daniel Dennis was wrestling, and Daniel Dennis is head 42 with 20 seconds left. And I remember saying, Jason Ness better know his go-to move because he's got one shot to do it, and he better do it now. And he goes in with that super duck body lock down 2 and 2. And I said something like, never say die. And that was an incredible match right there. Were you in the place then?
Yes.
Yeah. And you know, and both those guys are really good guys. But matches like that, seeing four timers, being a part of that, that Kyle Snyder Gwizdowski match a few years ago, there's ones like that. And so anytime you're in Carver Hawkeye, Bryce Jordan, Rec Hall, Minnesota, any place where they fill them up and it's all on the line, can't be beat.
Yeah. There aren't too many things like being inside like the Division I national championships and feeling just whenever, like you said, when everybody's cheering and you got a couple of studs coming to the mat. And I can tell you growing up an hour from Oklahoma State, a lot of Sundays we would go watch Oklahoma State versus whoever they were wrestling. And the big one was always Iowa. And so I'll never forget. I don't know how old I was, maybe middle school age, maybe early high school, but of course they're two of the top teams in the nation. They come in and Dan Gable absolutely knew how to play a crowd. Just incredible. So Oklahoma State's packed and he comes out and people are booing him and all this stuff, but there's a section over behind the score table and you have a bunch of alumni that are there and boosters and things like that. And so there was a bad call on the mat and there was an argument going on and things started getting intense and the crowd yelling and it gets dead quiet. And someone from the booster section yells something at Gable. And Gable runs and jumps over the table like he's going after the guy. And he wasn't. It was a WWE, but he knew he'd get the place fired. Oh, everybody went crazy in the place. And I could see a smirk and everyone was like, yes, this is awesome. That was one of the best like wrestling moments for me as a young man.
Now when would that been?
Man, I would say early 90s.
Okay.
Probably.
Yeah. Gable, of course, he became my partner. It's so interesting. I've learned so much from Dan Gable. And when he retired in 97, in 98, we went after him to join us on Iowa Public Television. And I was, the play-by-play was going to retire, and I was going to move from analyst that I'd been since 86 over to play-by-play, which then I was until this year. And so we're sitting in his chalet office, right next to his house, north of Iowa City. Chad Zappit will build it for him. Got a sauna, got a workout room, got bunk beds, got an office. We're sitting there. And Dan, I probably told you this one before, but Dan's wringing his hands, thinking about this. And he said, well, everything is just like this. Everything I've ever done. Now I want to be the best. I want to be the best. And this is no different. And he goes, Timmy, you're good, but you can be better. I'm about 45 at the time, whatever that is. I said, yes, sir, coach. Yes, sir. That's rung in my head almost every day since. You're good, Timmy, but you can be better. That was the coach. And I tell that when Coach Dan came down just a couple of years ago to a golf outing for FCA in Morning Sun. And just for me, down there, and I have him up there, and I tell that story. And he looked at me and he goes, you got better, didn't you? Yeah, I got better. But my right arm was sore because it's Iowa State and you're on Iowa Public Television and I'm having to hold you down because you're trying to get out of your chair and you're calling Iowa we. And it's not we, and it's Iowa. It's Iowa State because it's not we and they. And my arm got so sore. And then when Jim joined us a couple of years later, he took part of that too. I think that they said, hey, we can't keep having this we got to have it even. And that's where Jim came in the picture. And Jim Gibbons is just incredible person. Talk about Iowa. Life being about relationships. We've been together for over 20 years. And so it's just been great. And it was fun this year because this year I went back, I trained another play-by-play because Shane's kind of, he's got the media, we brought Shane in a few years ago and now Shane Sparks has got the media presence and the whole bit. And he's the future and he's the new play-by-play for Big Ten, but I moved back over to analyst because we needed to have two teams. We're doing so much. I really give credit to Mark Halsey, and then our producer Jeff Sermon is tremendous, and so we're showing a lot even in the COVID season, and Jim and I then were not together until the Big Ten championships because we were both analysts, but it felt so good to be together again at the ESPN as analysts together. It's been a tremendous partnership over the years.
Yeah. And what an awesome thing for all of us wrestling fans that just more and more wrestling is being streamed. It's being shown on TV, and then we got real wrestling guys that know the sport, that are speaking, that are analyzing, that are doing all this. So for wrestling fans, it's incredible. I mean, it was like, I hadn't really thought about this till just this moment, but man, it wasn't that many years ago when it was like a big treat whenever wrestling got to be on TV. Like, yeah, oh man, wrestling 3 times a year, like wrestling's on TV, you're so pumped.
And so it's been 14 years that I've been with Big Ten Network on it and everything. But, hey, and there is a lot more opportunity, and there's a lot of people, they might be listening right now. Yeah, that Johnson's too old. He's done. He's over the hill. He needs to, step aside. And so somebody said today, I mean, it was someone, I think it was, I forget, Gabe Dean or somebody said, do you think people would support recent wrestlers being broadcasters? And of course people, yeah. And my buddies Jim Miller and Mark Johnson, they don't want anybody else but their friends, and everything. But one guy said, well, it sure would be a whole lot better than those 2 old guys that did the NCAAs. And I looked down and I said, does he have any likes? Good, no likes. And I liked it because I just said, hey, you're not wrong. I mean, yeah, I understand. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, there's an incredible art to broadcasting because, yeah, you got to know what's going on. You also have to know the show. You got to know when to get in and out. You got to know what the producers, it's not about you blabbing and getting excited and going crazy. The people that know the deal, Big Ten Network and ESPN. I mean, talk about what's this? Well, what are you saying? I'm saying the people that know how to put on the show for TV are the TV people.
Yeah.
So the broadcasters better be ready to go. It's not about me. It's about what do you want, because you're the experts. Play-by-play runs the show, and you got to know when to come in and when to go out. You got to. I've learned over the time, when I was first doing it, if there's 20 seconds left, I know that's sacred time. That's 20 seconds left. That means that play-by-play is going to get somebody in his ear, which I was for years, saying, hey, we got a promo coming up. I'm going to take you out on the count, 8, 7, 6, 5, and we're going to commercial. Well, if the analyst isn't paying attention and doesn't know what's going on, he's jumping in there and saying, oh, that's so great. Play-by-play guy's got to get a promo in. They're in his ear going, 8, 7, you got to go out and get. And so what I've learned is, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. You got to know when to talk and when to get out. And so I am real excited about, hey, I'd love to see like Jordan Burroughs become the new analyst face when he's done. If not before, which I mean, I've got other things that I want to do with FCA Wrestling, and I don't know, maybe a podcast, something like that. I don't know how to do that stuff like you do and everything, but I'd step aside for it immediately because, wow, what an incredible gift that would be to the wrestling world. But I'm just glad that my skin's thick enough. I'm going, I think I'll like that comment.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, man, for someone who's watched a lot of NCAAs and listened to you for a lot of time, your shirt says it right there, keep on. So until you're ready to step away, like you said, if you're like, hey, JB's coming in, I'm going to let him take it. But till then, you just keep on. So, okay, Coach, I always like to kind of close out the show with this question, and you can answer one of these or you can answer all 3, totally up to you, and expound as much as you want. Okay. So tell me about, and this may have even came from FCA at one time, but tell me about a hero, a hardship, or a highlight in your life. Hero, hardship, or highlight.
Well, the heroes I've talked about, David Beck, who saved my life, an Eagle Scout, and Bob Dara, who made all the difference in the world to me. But I would also tell you that a 65-year-old oil man in Wichita, Kansas, who was with the Navigator Ministry, tremendous, successful businessman, takes me under his wings, takes me to the Petroleum Club, which is on the top floor of Bank 4, and teaches me how to pray in public, and writes down nuggets of wisdom on napkins. And I remember thinking, man, this is what's most important to him, mentoring a young man like me. I hope that I want to do that someday. But I was admitting to myself, I'm not there yet. And that's the most exciting prospect for me. I have 5 coaches that I disciple on Saturday morning that I just have been pouring into just because I want to grow as a disciple maker. And so Bill Brunson, because he took the time to open up the Word of God and to mentor me and disciple me, is a hero of mine.
Yeah.
More and more as I grow. Hardships next.
Yeah.
Here's what I say to that. I say this almost every day. Life's hard and God's good. And let's not confuse the two. Life is hard this side of heaven. And I'm thankful because of what Jesus did that I'm going to be with him forever, okay? And not destined to an eternity in hell, separated from God, consciously aware of your separation. I mean, it's just, thank you, Jesus. But life's hard. And so I would say a hardship is what we all are experiencing here in this fallen world.
Yeah.
I mean, and so marriage is hard, parenting's hard, relationships are hard, and yet I'm committed to marriage, being a great parent, and being as many relationships as God wants me in. But life's a hardship.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And you better, I don't know whether you saw the opening on Thursday morning. I don't know whether I did it again, but we celebrated history in wrestling. And I just said, it came to me, Sean Kenny at the time, because I had Mike Cousins at night. And he basically said, we're celebrating wrestling, Tim. And I said, that's right. Wrestling's the greatest sport in the world. I get emotional. I said, the guts, the gumption, and the grit that it takes to grind out and be great in a 7-minute match is the same qualities, the guts, the gumption, and grit that it takes to grind out a good 70-year life. Wrestling's the greatest sport in the world. The world needs wrestling. And that's why. And so I guess that is because, you know, what we're seeing, and we haven't gotten political today, and there's no need to, but what we're seeing, the progressive movement is a godless movement. There's no glorifying God. They hate God. God's not a part of it. I mean, you know, whether they're mad at him, don't believe in him or whatever, and they're trying to find utopia here on earth where we're just on a journey through to heaven, which is utopia, you know, which is the perfect. So there's not a green enough deal that's going to save this earth, because God's got a plan to have a new heaven and a new earth. Okay. And so I just, to look at what, you know, how much I just grieve, but God can handle it. I grieve the hatred towards God. And that is probably the greatest hardship right now for me. But I believe in compound interest, even though I don't understand it. And what I mean by that is, hey, I just want to get up every day, and whoever God puts in front of me, I do have the answer. And that's the Lord, that's Jesus. It's the only hope that we have. And so we just have to believe that, you know, God's he's sovereign, he wins, and he uses us. And whether we're not going to solve the world's problem by some big government program or some battle against millions, we solve it by, you know, sharing the gospel that, you know, Jesus died on the cross for our sins, was raised again that we might have life for those who repent of their sins and believe. I mean, So we trust Jesus as Savior and Lord, and we honor him in everything we do, and we help others know what it means to trust Jesus and have this joy that he wants to give us. And so what was the last one? What was the last?
So it's a highlight, hero, and hardship. So give me a highlight.
I would tell you that a highlight today is being with you. And I mean that. So I hope that the Lord gives me that mindset. He's given me a mindset of a wrestler, and I'm very thankful for that. My son was a baseball player through college, but he wrestled one year and he was better than I ever thought about being. Carl Perry said, "Hey, I can't teach the stuff that your son can do," when he was in 7th grade, but he loved baseball. But he didn't go ahead, but he put on his resume, and he always said, "I've got the mindset and the work ethic of a wrestler."
Yeah.
It means something to him, you know? And so I'm thankful for that, but highlights are getting to, talk about Jesus, talk about wrestling, talk about life with people like you. And then tomorrow, I get to go be with my biggest fan. Lisa and I are navigating 2 homes right now, Colorado Springs and Champaign. And over the next 2 years, I'll probably finish my tenure as the vice president for the Midwest over the 5 states for FCA. And then we'll decide, hey, where are we going to go next? And I would imagine that Colorado Springs has a lead on that. But my mom is going to be 93. And she just moved from Morning Sun after all her life to Winona Lake, Indiana, where my sister lives. And I'm going to go see her and spend a few days with her, leaving tomorrow morning, and go up and spend time with her. And she such a wrestling fan. If you were watching the Big Ten championships on Saturday morning, she had to go to the hospital for something going on with the heart. She was all upset because she was going to miss the wrestling. And my sister sent me a picture, and I sent the picture to the producer. And the next thing you know, as we are looking at tweets that we are putting up, then all of a sudden a picture of my mom in her hospital bed with the tablet and the 4 box there. And so she made national news. But just say something about my mom. So I wrestled, let's see, about 175 matches in high school and college. And so when you're in high school, is around there. When you're in Division III, is pretty much around the Midwest for Wisconsin, Illinois. All my wrestling matches in high school and then college, except for the Sunshine Open in Dade County, Fort Lauderdale. The junior college coach at the time that we went to my freshman year at Co down to Florida for the Sunshine Open was Rick Tucci. Do you know who Rick Tucci is? Rick Tucci is the official. Yeah, and then he was, and then the first ever Division III championships I wrestled in. They went from college division and university to Division I, II, and III in 1973, 74. So the first ones ever were at Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and I wrestled there. Only 2 times Mom never saw me wrestle personally in the thing. And then when I was coaching, she was there. She actually got a plaque from Mount Vernon High School when I left. She goes up at the celebration and said, Mount Vernon's #1 fan. And so I get to go see, and she'll want to talk about is wrestling, and when I go up there. And so that's a highlight, and being with you is a highlight.
Yeah, well, thank you. And yeah, that's awesome, man. Wrestling moms make wrestling teams, man. They make the world go round. And I tell you what, they're passionate people. And
who else are going to bake the pies?
Yeah, absolutely. Gotta love it. I depend on wrestling moms to make our organization function like it should. I get to coach, and they help create all this culture. It's awesome. So, well, Tim, thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it. This has been good, man. Like I'm going to walk away.
It's probably longer than anyone you've done.
It's I swear we could probably talk for 3 hours, and when we get done, I'm going to work out because you get me fired up. You get me motivated. So,
well, you got to keep on, and that's right. You just got to keep on. And I've got shirts. Have I given you a keep on shirt yet?
No, but I want one after I saw it on you there.
All right. So, and it's the most comfortable. why do we keep on? Well, of course, we want to finish strong, but Paul says to his letter to the Philippians, which is the most encouraging letter, but he says in Philippians 1:6, I am confident of this, he who began a good work in you will complete it until the day of Christ Jesus. He's telling the Philippians. And then in 2:13 he says, for it is God who works in you to work out his purposes for you. And then in 3:14, he says, so press on or keep on towards the goal of Christ Jesus. So because, as Paul said, we can be confident that God's going to complete the work in Chad Parks that he had in store for him before you were even in your mother's womb. He's going to complete that. We're confident of that. And it's him who's working in you to do his purpose. How can we not keep on, Chad?
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. So
Bless you.
Yes, sir, and bless you. And how can we follow you? How can people follow you on social media? And I'll put all the links in our show notes. But
well, first of all, they're going to be very disappointed. That's why I'm saying, Shane, go get them, baby, because I'm not. But it's at TJ Keep On, and It's at TJ Keep On is my Twitter. I feel so guilty when people come and want to be a Facebook friend or a LinkedIn, because I go, one, I can only get on it accidentally. I never do anything. So I've got 600-700 requests because I don't want to turn them down, but I don't want to say, yes, go, you're going to have a good time, because I don't do anything. But on Twitter, I just like to, I don't get actively involved in things that wouldn't behoove me, one as a Christ follower or as a broadcaster. So I let those guys whose names we know that go at each other, I let them go at each other.
Yeah.
But I do like to retweet positive tweets that I think are going to help people live a better life. And so it's at TJ Keep On. I think there's an exclamation mark. You'll see it.
I'll find it.
Put it up.
Yep.
And so that's how. And so, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll put that on there. I'll put the FCA Wrestling website on there so people can jump on and find it and find the resources. So again, man, thank you for being on here. I just want to call you coach. I know you haven't coached in a while, but to me, you're a coach still. So I appreciate you.
That's what they called this talk this morning, Coffee with the Coach, because, once a coach, you're always a coach. And I'm saying, coaches don't retire. We just figure out how to endure overtime. And then the other thing is I when I think what's next, I'm never going to retire. I'm just going to figure out, where I'm going to be rehired. And so who knows? My mom, she's 90. She just retired from a gift shop that she opened up when she was 68. She ran it for 25 years and just closed it in August. So I've got some genes in me. It says I better figure something out.
Oh yeah. And I know you 100% will. You are you got too much energy and way too many gifts. So you're gonna, like you say, like your shirt, man, you're gonna keep on. But I appreciate all you do, and everybody listening. Hopefully you've been encouraged. Take this, share it with somebody else who will encourage them in their lives, and make sure you take notes. There's so many notes that can be taken from this podcast episode. So again, thank you, Coach. And for everybody listening, may God bless you, smile upon you, shine his face upon you. Until next time, peace.